Welcome back to our Christmas content advent calendar, where every single day through to the 24th of December, we're bringing you a brand new video. Today's video, it's all about low light photography. It's all about making the most of those beautiful portraits in low light, those beautiful landscapes, cityscapes. There's so much that is possible once the sun's gone down and it's getting a bit darker, which is good because this time of year, feels like the sun goes down at something like midday, comes up at like 11, goes down at 12. Then you've got a ridiculous amount of time of darkness between those brief glimpses of the sun. So it's good to be able to get out and do some low light photography so you're not just restricted to, a couple of hours photography in the day. Now, the first tip we're going to talk about is using a slower shutter speed. Obviously, one of the biggest problems you're going to face with low light photography, and it's a bit of a giveaway because it's in the name, is the lack of light. And one of the easiest ways to combat this is to have a slower shutter speed. Now that means slowing that down, letting the shutter open for longer, letting more light in to the sensor. That's a great way to brighten up your image without having to resorting to cranking up the ISO. However, one of the issues you're going to face with that is that you are going to introduce things like camera shake. Any movement of the camera at all is going to create a blurry photo. So one of the big things here, if you're going to be slowing down your shutter speed, is to have something to stabilize your camera. Now, the easiest thing to use is obviously a tripod. Even a lightweight one is going to be great. In fact, I've been out on a lot of low light shoots where I've had the camera on a lightweight tripod so that I can actually just pick up the whole thing and move it around rather than take the camera off, move, reset up. I can just have it all set up and move it as one thing. But any kind of stabilization method is going to work. Now, I have also, when I haven't had a tripod on me, I've been able to rest my camera on a wall, on a bench, really anything that's going to stop it from moving. That's all you want to be doing here, is just stopping that movement. Another tip for using the slower shutter speed is to set a little 2-second timer so that once you press the button, the camera just counts to 2 before taking the picture. Now with the slower shutter speed, that's going to mean that any camera shake introduced by you actually pressing the shutter, that's going to be gone. Of course, shutter speed is not the only way that you can actually get more light into that sensor. So tip number 2 is to use a nice fast aperture. Now, this is perfect for those low light portraits because number 1, you're going to be getting lots of light into the sensor. So something like an f1.2, f1.4, even f1.8 is going to be getting lots and lots of light into that sensor. And the reason it's perfect specifically for portraits is with a nice wide open aperture like that, you're going to be getting lots of nice bokeh in the background. That means all those city lights, all of those nice fairy lights or whatever you've got in the background are going to become nice big balls of bokeh light. It looks so good. Perfect. Any colored lights you can get in the background, whoo, that looks so good. Now, when it comes to cityscape or landscape, a faster aperture doesn't always work as well. Something like f1.4 or f1.8 can actually be a little bit tricky to work with because your depth of field is going to be so shallow that it's difficult to get everything you want to be in focus actually in focus. That said, I have found that actually stopping down to something like f2.8 can be enough to get a nice sharp image with everything pretty much in focus, at least to a very much an acceptable standard. That's the thing about low light, is there's going to be some trade-offs because you don't have the amount of light to kind of play around with. You are going to have to decide what is more important to you. But I found that f2.8 makes for a very nice image. Of course, you could use a wider angle lens, so something like a 16mm, even 24mm. When you're using something like that at something like f2.8 or even a little bit faster, you don't tend to get so much of an issue with things being out of focus. Using a wider focal length tends to give you a little bit more room for playing around with a faster aperture when it comes to depth of field. Of course, if all else fails, tip number 3 is to crank up that ISO. Now, most current cameras, newer cameras, are perfectly capable of handling higher ISO values. It's not like when ISO 800 was like, whoa, that's pushing it a bit too much. We are in a situation now where you can comfortably go 1600, 3200, even 6400. A lot of the newer mirrorless cameras in particular handle that so well. For me, that always works as a fallback option. So if I can get the result through a slower shutter speed or from a faster aperture, I will, but in a situation where that's not working, I will resort to just cranking up the ISO. Now, tip number 4 is to always shoot in RAW. That's going to give you so much more room when you come to process this image later on. because you can affect the white balance, you can affect the exposure, you can really play around with things. You know, if you have underexposed, which is very easy to do in a low light situation, you can bring that exposure up. You can play around with the highlights and the shadows. If you have got the white balance wrong, which believe me is so easy, I've done that so many times when it comes to low light, because streetlights are difficult to work with. They're just difficult to get the white balance right when you're using streetlights. It also means that you just have a lot more control over the final look of your image. It just gives you full control over things like colors and, like I mentioned before, exposure, so you get the final image you want. Now, tip number 5 is a pretty obvious one, but it can be quite tricky, and it's to look for ambient lighting to use. So whether it's portrait and you want to look for something to light your subject, whether it's landscape and you need dots of light to kind of light things up, or whether it's cityscape and you want to find those lights within the city to really make the most of it. Ambient light is pretty much what it's all about now. So let's start with portrait. Anything like a neon sign or even traffic lights or anything that's giving off interesting light is going to work really well. I find that street lights by themselves, not the most appealing light, but something like a neon light for a restaurant or a shop or something like that can look amazing. Something like fairy lights or Christmas lights or anything like that that's dotted around the city, that can make for a great portrait as well, especially if you can get the lights in the background and they're like a blurred out bokeh kind of look, or if you can get them in the foreground and shoot through them, that can be amazing. So any kind of ambient light that's going to shine light onto your subject, that's an interesting color or kind of nice soft light. But for me, neon light works the best. It's just very different to the kind of thing you would be able to shoot pretty much any other time of day. Now, when it comes to landscape, I actually find that shooting just after the sun has gone down, and actually it can look dark to your eye, but shooting with a longer shutter speed of something like 10 seconds or 20 seconds can really brighten things up. I've actually been in a situation before where I've been absolutely shocked by how bright an image is when it's looked dark, completely dark to my naked eye. When the sun has gone down, if you set a long exposure, like 10, 20 seconds, you're gonna get that residual sunlight that's still bouncing around in the sky, that's still coming from the sun. The sun's gone down, but it's still shining light up into the sky, and if you expose for long enough, you're gonna get that light. And it lights everything up and it looks really, really nice. It's a really, really pleasing look. You know, it's very, very, very soft, and everything just looks really nice. So it's almost like a slight extension of blue hour or golden hour. It's just very, very pleasant. So I find that shooting landscape, low light landscape, just after the sun's gone down, within an hour, where in this time of year it's dark, oh, that looks really, really nice. Now, cityscape is probably one of the easier ones if you live in a big, vibrant city. Basically, you're looking for any kind of composition that's gonna give you lots of interesting, nice lights. Now, whether you wanna go for a long exposure and try and get car lights as they zoom by, maybe on a roundabout, or there's a perfect place in Brighton with a clock tower where you can get the lights going around the clock tower, that can look amazing. Or whether you wanna go for a nice composition of some big skyscrapers and shops and things like that always have amazing lights, or just up the side of a building, but with all these nice lights coming on and all that sort of thing. It can look so good, especially, like I said before about landscape, sun's gone down, maybe you go for a slightly longer exposure, you get that blue in the sky, and it's contrasted with the orange of the lights and the buildings and things like that. Oh, that can look good. That can look really good. So ultimately, when it comes to portrait, landscape, or cityscape, you're looking for that ambient light to really fill in the photo and give you the light that you need to light things up. And kind of a bonus tip here, which is something that I just find when I do low light photography, is expect to shoot a lot of photos. So don't worry if when you look on the back of the camera, things don't look that good. I have been out on low light shoots where I've taken, 150 photos and I've only got really a couple that I might actually want to use. And then similarly, I've been on other shoots where it's just been perfect, a perfect run around the city, just getting these lights and these shots, and I've had a really, really great time. But it's a hard genre of photography because it is just inherently difficult without that much light. So don't be too hard on yourself if you do come away with loads of photos and then you just have to go through them and bin them, a lot of them. You know, using a slower shutter speed can result in shaky, blurred footage. Using a high ISO can result in a lot of noise. Using a fast aperture can result in a really shallow depth of field and you didn't quite nail the focus. It's really difficult and you're contending with all three of those issues at the same time while trying to compose with limited light. Oh, it's difficult, but it's very, very rewarding if you can get it right. So definitely persevere. Now, we've really only scratched the surface of low light photography there, so if you do have any of your own tips, pop them down in the comments. I love reading through those. Anything you want to see in some future videos, because I've got a lot to make before the 24th, pop them down in the comments. I'll try my best to get to anything that sounds good. Any questions, pop them down there as well. I'll pop a full list of all the equipment used for the photos, for this video, for everything in the description. Make sure to give this video a like if you enjoyed it. Make sure to subscribe for more content every day to the 24th. I'll see you tomorrow. And as always, thanks for watching.